Go to Mr. Underwood.
Great. We've got a brief update here on the integrated system plan, as Systems Chair Williams noted earlier. This is Shannon Coleman. She's our Director of Energy Portfolio Planning. And she'll be leading this effort with Dan Linehan, who's also in the back of the room. So Shannon has a brief update for us, and I'll turn it over to Shannon.
I will try to be brief. As Brad mentioned, my team does have the distinct pleasure of leading the integrated system plan. We will be presenting updates on the ISP on a quarterly basis. So we wanted to start this meeting today by introducing high-level concepts. What is the ISP? What are the goals of the ISP? Give you a general idea of the process that's involved, and then touch on a high-level timeline for the coming year. As a recipient of federally generated hydropower, OPPD is required by the Department of Energy's Energy Planning and Management Program to submit an integrated resource plan to the Western Area Power Administration, or WAPA, every 5 years. WAPA does have some specific requirements for the IRP, which include load forecasting, the consideration or evaluation of both supply side and demand side options, an action plan, and opportunities for public participation. It's really important to note that although we're talking about the IRP or ISP in the context of that WAPA submittal, as a part of utility best practices, utilities routinely do conduct this type of comprehensive resource plan. So this is something that we would be doing regardless of the WAPA requirement. So what is an IRP? An integrated resource plan starts with a long-term load forecast and compares that load forecast to the capabilities of our resource portfolio. This comparison then points out what are our future needs for resources and determines the timing and the magnitude of those future resource needs. We do a variety of types of modeling of our system with the addition of different types of future resources. And we really try to be very comprehensive in that and include almost every feasible type of technology option that we can find. And we calculate what's the best combination of resources to add to our current portfolio to best serve future demand. And what does best mean in that sense? We go back to the mission statement and say affordable, reliable, environmentally sensitive. Then we also use a variety of scenarios to find common solutions that say not just what the best solution is today, but what is the common solution that looks good in a variety of future states. And we subject those candidate portfolios to a number of sensitivities to best quantify the risk response of those scenarios or of those candidate portfolios. You'll note here that both the WAPA requirement and our previous submittal, we're using the term integrated resource plan, and now we're coming to you today saying integrated system plan. This is quite intentional and we think very valuable. In the past, utilities have almost exclusively conducted this type of analysis and this type of study by looking at generation and the utilities' generation needs in isolation without considering the needs of transmission and distribution and customer or demand side solutions. Very recently, a handful in the industry have started to recognize that the interdependence of resources, transmission, and distribution are very important, and that those planning functions should really be coordinated and more integrated. So this time around, we're hopefully expanding from that type of study from just a resource plan to that systems plan, avoid the siloing of those planning functions, and really get to more optimization of our system in total. We've contracted with E3 to conduct the majority of the technical modeling and some of the integration for the ISP. You likely will recall their similar involvement in our previous IRP, specific to the Pathways to Decarbonization study and in the near-term generation study. Very important that E3 is one of the very few, if not the only, vendor who has conducted multiple integrated system plans. And so we're very excited to have their expertise and their guidance as we kind of step into something that's new for us. We'll also be performing a fair bit of in-house work. We'll be doing load forecasting, production cost modeling, transmission system modeling, and distribution system modeling. So next slide here. We want to also provide a high-level timeline and step through what you can expect over the next year. The top line here focuses on the technical work, and the bottom line focuses on the stakeholder engagement. So technical work began last year with an RFP for vendor services in July. We then awarded that contract in October, followed by onboarding activities and project scheduling. We're currently in the process of data collection and alignment on what that integration looks like between the modeling and planning functions between resources transmission and distribution. This looks to be a pretty intense process for Q1. Then in Q2, we'll move on to finalization of what those modeling inputs look like and what the scenarios look like, and conduct the bulk of the modeling in Q2. In Q3, we plan to finalize modeling and prepare initial results. And then in Q4, we should have final results, incorporate those results into a report, then come back to the board for approval of that final report before we submit that report to WAPA at the end of the year. The bottom line focuses on our stakeholder engagement plan, which we view as a very important and valuable part of this process. As a public power entity, we definitely recognize the responsibility to our customer owners and their involvement, review, and feedback throughout this process. And as we create this plan is very important. Starting in about September of last year, we began the internal process of structuring what that stakeholder engagement plan looks like. The first step of that was pre-engagement. We sent out a survey to a subset of commercial, residential, and industrial customers asking about their preferences for engagement. Those questions included: what types of communications do you prefer? What preferred formats do you have for the opportunities to provide feedback for us and engage with us on what the plan looks like? And what's the frequency of information and feedback that you prefer? We'll use that information to refine our stakeholder engagement process and those outreach efforts for the year ahead. You can see that the remainder of the year is focused on quarterly workshops. The first quarter workshop will be an introduction to the ISP and preparing customers for what that engagement can look like and what their opportunities will be for the year ahead. Quarter two will involve quite a bit. In quarter two, we'll discuss inputs and assumptions for the modeling, talk about modeling scenarios, and then review at a high level, what does resource planning really look like? What are the goals of resource planning? And explore some of the trade-offs that are inherent in resource planning. Then in quarter three, we will center around the review of the initial results, and in quarter four, we'll present those final results. After the final results are presented in the workshop, there will be a 30-day public comment period before we then ask for board approval of the ultimate report. Next steps, we are very focused on data collection and integration of what the modeling needs to look like between all of the different efforts there. So that's kind of our current push right now, as well as trying to plan for workshop number one. Right now, we anticipate workshop number one will be at the beginning of March. So we're kind of planning that effort right now. So if there are any questions on the ISP, happy to help, or there are quite a few individuals in the room who would have additional information too.
I've got a couple questions. Beyond board approval, what's our role in this process?
I'm sorry.
Beyond approval of the final plan, what's the board's role in this process? Where is it, in addition to bringing information to us, like, can you help us understand what our role is in engaging in the process?
Certainly. We would definitely invite engagement all along the process as we go in, both in the workshops and in the board meetings when we bring the information. We would also really like encouragement to everyone in the district to attend the workshops. So, some of that publicizing that and encouragement there would definitely help. Dan, I don't know if you have anything else that might be points of board engagement.
No, I think you covered it pretty well. Like we talked about, quarterly updates to the board. Systems pre-committee will likely get somewhat more frequent updates as well, but at minimum, board will get quarterly updates, and very much encouraged to participate in the workshops in addition to the board forums as well.
Okay, thank you. Talk to me a little bit about timeline. So Q4 26, so end of this year. Could you put a finer point on that? I mean, when are we expected at this point in the timeline to actually submit to WAPA? Is that October, November, December?
Our submittal to WAPA will be end of the year, will be December 31st.
December 31st. Okay. Got it. So we're anticipating board approval in our December board meeting. That's what that means?
Ideally.
Okay. Naturally, at the risk of stating the obvious, there's some lead up to that the board would be involved in?
Yes.
Right. Okay. And then trying to connect some dots to our conversation last month. So we're expecting, if not have received GIAs, which is going to initiate SPP study as it relates to North Omaha Station. Could you help us understand how that process sort of fits within the ISP process and what we're expecting?
Great question, Brad. I don't know if you want to, we spent a lot of time kind of pushing this back and forth internally. So I don't know if you have.
I think fundamentally the expectation is that facilities we feel retired in all of this work. And that's the posture that we're taking into, if that's helpful.
Yeah, that's helpful. And maybe this is repeating some stuff that we've talked about, but there was a lot discussed over the last several months, right? Talk to us about the SPP study process and how the results of that will be integrated into our ISP.
Sure. So the resolution's clear on when that process needs to be started. From the time that process starts via the tariff, SPP has a year to perform their analysis work. We're cautiously optimistic it may be completed sooner than a year, but we have to generally assume that SPP will use the full time in the tariff they're allotted.
Also, I think it's important to acknowledge this is where the S in integrated systems plan comes into play. Traditionally, we have focused this process in the resources, meaning generation resources. What type of generation do we need? We're doing this in a more comprehensive way that includes transmission planning and distribution planning, acknowledging that all these three domains play together, and we really cannot be successful just addressing generation if we don't have transmission and distribution. What the SPP study will address is mostly, if not exclusively, on the transmission side. That is where the tariff and what SPP governs our planning as being a full participant of SPP is they will share with us what infrastructure investments need to happen from a transmission perspective. So that'll be very important, and it's part of that integrated systems plan that will inform how we move forward. We have very clear direction from the board about we need to prioritize transmission and distribution investments to accelerate the conversion of North Omaha Station. That's clearly spelled out in the resolution. But that's how this study would work. The study is not going to tell us what generation we need, right? That's the IRP piece of the ISP, but it's complementary to that. I hope that helps.
That does help. Thank you. Perhaps related, perhaps not. I'm curious about, as we look at schedules, like we often talk about critical paths and bottlenecks, any sense for where the schedule might, like where's the biggest risk from a schedule standpoint?
That's a great question. Unfortunately, it's probably Q1. There's a lot of data collection that's required, a lot of alignment around what do the scenarios look like? What are the assumptions around existing units? What are the assumptions around future technologies? So there is a lot of upfront work that is required here, and a lot of back and forth between us and E3, and even all the internal. That's a really heavy lift to compile that kind of information and then gain internal alignment on what those assumptions are. Specific even to North Omaha, what is the earliest assumption we're going to use? What are the delays we might assume as options in the modeling? So it's kind of getting it all ready for the model, and then the press and go is a little bit of an easier part. So definitely in the beginning.
So we'll know a lot more by the end of March, in other words, about.
I would agree.
And I would be remiss if I didn't mention, I've mentioned this before in a setting like this where people, right? We have all the modeling, we have all the partnerships. We have a very small but mighty team that does this on an ongoing basis. So I think it's going to be very important for us managing the organization to give you and your team, Shannon, the time, the space, the resources you need to complete this. There's a lot of expertise and continuity that has to happen, and I think that could become a bottleneck at some point. So that's I would like to call that out. Okay,
that's good. Thank you for naming that. My last question. So we've got 4 stakeholder workshops. Is it true that the general audience is all customer owners? Like we're welcoming everyone, doesn't matter size of the customer, residential, commercial, industrial, we're opening that up to everyone. That's right?
Absolutely. Yep.
Are there any particular more narrow silos of customer owners that we are focused on reaching out to, whoever they may be, right? Larger customers?
Yeah, Brooke, do you want to touch on some of those efforts? We do have some plans.
I would just say that even through our pre-engagement work, we reached out to residential, commercial, and industrial customers. And we've got a lengthy list of stakeholders we engage with that we know are interested and involved in the process and have been in the past. We're certainly mindful that the industry is shifting. There's a lot of needs and interests of us. So we're trying to engage now early and often and continue that throughout the process. So among the economic development community, public officials, environmental groups, we've got a pretty robust group that we're engaging with already.
Sorry, I said last question. Now this will be my. Help me understand, like, I'm thinking, my simple brain thinks about this as a very like complicated modeling process. So I'm curious, maybe what the narrative is to the public, to our customer owners, for how their involvement as a stakeholder will potentially influence a process that's very technical in nature. So could you help maybe just the general public understand what their role and responsibility is in this process?
Yeah, I like that question, particularly because it is a little daunting when you look at a very large modeling effort and, you know, how can I influence this? And a lot of that, again, goes back to the Q1 and Q2 workshops, where we really are saying, here are the data inputs, here are the assumptions that we're gonna go into the model with. The public has a really large involvement opportunity there to say, what about this? What about, and ask those questions of, are those the right assumptions? You know, both about the direction OPPD is moving in and the world in general. You know, we kind of have those two avenues parallel at the same time. And that's how we're constructing our scenarios, is to say, what do we think we can affect, and the strategies and the direction that OPPD will move in the future? And what do we think the external world will look like that will impact how the market moves, how you know, technology costs are, how fuel costs are, all these things. And so I think that is a really good opportunity for the public to step in there and ask those what about questions. I think that's it kind of opens up, you know, we get a little narrowly focused with what we see every day. So that's definitely an opportunity to widen our focus and allow us to look at other things.
Great.
Go ahead, please.
I might add just a little bit. I think we view opportunities like this as one, both to hear from the public and in turn to do a bit of education on what ends up being a complex business. So acknowledge that often the engagement we get is from those that have the strongest interest and share a perspective. And we're glad and welcome to hear that, because that's really important. And it gives us a chance to play that back to them in a broader context of some of the trade-offs and the balances that have to happen in the decision-making. So we look at that as both an obligation and an opportunity as we engage to both listen and play back and do some education where it makes sense.
And I would say that's it's something that I've asked my team to consider, and don't take this as given. The team will decide, but I've asked them to look at best practices, you know, simulation exercises, right? And in a very high level, just something to give the public and potentially the board the notion of, hey, this is not that easy, right? There are trade-offs, and if you put more of these and less of these, what happens to the reliability? What happens to affordability? And sometimes that level of simulation goes a long way in understanding the trade-offs that ultimately the team has to make on a modeling basis.
Yeah. Okay, great. You're good? I'm good, thank you. So
well, kind of riffing off that a little bit, excuse me. We had some criticism in previous months of not giving some choices about generation options specifically. So this is incredibly complicated. I appreciate that. Will there be we could do A or we could do B, and then talking about those trade-offs as how
that's a great question. And that's kind of the differential between initial and final results. And the initial results, we'll be able to bring, you know, all of the numbers back, all of the calculations that say, here's how this portfolio performed in this scenario, and compare all those results, and then kind of qualitatively talk about what are the common threads there, how do we want to then compose the answer, the resource plan, because, all this is called an integrated system plan. It's more of a directional at the end. And then following on in 27 is when we would then expect there to be more concrete resource plan. So we're able to take all those answers and kind of synthesize what are the parts we like, and how do we create that best answer to move forward. So
If I may also, Director Marie, you talked about what role the board plays on these, and I think we had a robust discussion on these. The board, in the past, hasn't had to approve the IRP. We had a good discussion about how the board wants to approve the IRP, which I think is a great move, a great decision, because eventually this IRP is going to result in recommendations to the board to approve more generation, more transmission. So to the extent that the board is engaged in the development of the IRP and the board endorses and approves the IRP, then the next logical step would be, okay, this is what we're asking the board to approve, and it should be just a continuum of that whole process, right? Instead of just reaching out to the board and have board action when it's time to approve the investment. So
I would just offer to the amount of intentional and high quality engagement from customers on the front side is really going to control the experience that they have on the backside. And so for folks that maybe miss workshops, they're going to miss, to Tim's comment, the ability to really understand we don't control market operations, market policy. We only have so much ability to shape a technology cost. We only have so much ability to navigate a supply chain. And so really the connectedness early is what's really going to drive, I think, the ability to understand where we end up. And that's going to be really important.
Yeah, I get that. And at the risk of stating the obvious, not everybody's going to be able to be engaged in the first workshop, the second workshop. So we're going to have to be resourceful in figuring out how we're going to get them up to speed so that if they do have an opportunity to plug in later, they're not handicapped in that way. Like, you're totally right. And people are going to show up at different times.
Yeah. I think if I could make one more comment briefly, one of the biggest issues that's been the most challenging in the last 5 to 7 years in this space, I think many in the room know this, but it's the dynamic nature of things. If you have a policy change, if you have a tax law change, if you have a large scale shift in load, all of these plans get pressured in really unique ways. And I think that tends to be where we lose people sometimes. And so being able to talk about, I'll say, not the fundamentals, but really the relational aspect of some of these issues early, hopefully helps people feel more connected to what we're doing and the things we can influence versus the things we have to operate within. And I think that'll be important.
I would also offer that your last question is a really important thing that we're considering in the stakeholder engagement plan is how do we account for that? How do we prepare materials that people can catch up to the discussion? What's the best manner to do that and to encourage people to kind of go back and do their homework, engage in workshops. So good question.
One more question. You're a new face to the board. Shannon, if you wouldn't mind, could you tell us a little bit about your background and what prepares you for this leadership role?
Sure. Well, thank you for asking. I am a mechanical engineer. I spent many years doing industrial design work in district energy systems, working for a couple design firms in the area. And my position before this was at Municipal Energy Agency of Nebraska, where I also was manager of resource planning, conducted 2 IRPs for them. And I don't know if you're familiar with MEAN, but they operate in MISO, SPP, and in the West. So there's kind of a broad range there and a lot of considerations to be taken care of there. And then I moved here to OPPD as manager of resource planning and recently director of energy portfolio planning.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.